I decided to frame my remarks today in the context of a conversation I had 5 or 6 years ago with Reid Hoffman, the chairman and co-founder of LinkedIn, and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, a U.S. Senator. We were talking about the future of healthcare, and in the conversation I made the casual remark that I thought we needed to see Moore's Law take hold in how we addressed healthcare. And the senator said to me, "What's Moore's Law?" And Reid gave one of the best descriptions ever. He said, "Senator, you have to understand that in Washington, you think that every year things cost more and do less. In Silicon Valley, we understand that our products every year have to do twice as much and cost half as much." And that Moore's Law, of course, is that famous doubling of the density of transistors on a chip. That means that computing power accelerates such that the power in your wristwatch, and I don't mean the Apple Watch I'm showing here, but basically a cheap throwaway wristwatch, is greater than all the computing power that took us to the moon. I think it's ironic that both Neil Tyson and I are talking about the moon this morning, but it's super important to remember how far Moore's Law has taken us. And it's given us a cascade of miracles, and we're really just at the beginning of an enormous new set of transformations, which are resetting consumer expectations, and those consumer expectations are going to flow through to their expectations for government. We have a device in our pocket that we can talk to, that listens, and it can actually answer many, many common questions already. We can say, "Hey Siri, will you remember this for me? What's your advice about this kind of question?" This is small-scale AI, but applied in everyday life. Google will interrupt us and say, "You better leave early for work because traffic is especially bad." There's this global set of sensors, intelligence that's coming into Google's data centers that tell them in real time that traffic is worse than usual. And they know where I'm going because I've recorded it in my calendar, and they give me a warning. This network of data, this network of intelligence is becoming deeper and richer in the consumer world. We can even, using our phone, set arbitrary notions. In one particular example, I said, "Okay, Google, now, please remind me to get currants the next time I'm at Whole Foods." And my phone answered back, "Do you mean the Whole Foods on Bay Place in Oakland?" And I said, "Yes." And then sure enough, next time I was there, up popped an alert on my phone. This is remarkable application of computer technology giving us new features in real life. So we look at self-driving cars and the way technology is going from the screen into the everyday world, and we have to ask ourselves, what does this mean for government? I believe, and I recently organized a conference which I called the Next Economy Summit, where I think every organization and every business, every government is going to have to transform itself to keep up with the pace of technology. This is changing the structure of firms, and I think also the structure of government, where they're becoming more like networks and markets and less like individual organizations. It's changing the nature of work on both the on-demand services like Uber and Lyft, or in large corporations using low-wage workers. Algorithms are increasingly doing a lot of the management. Even when we have a site like the government site in Dubai, which actually is showing many of the best practices of the web. It's user-centered. It's not just a brochure for the government. It's actually giving really good practical connection for citizens. How far the website, which was really developed 10, 15, 20 years ago, even a great website is nothing like these latest crop of internet services. So when you look at a service like Uber, which lets someone summon a car to wherever they are in moments, Uber is trying to manage the supply of drivers such that 3 minutes is your pickup time. It's completely unacceptable that a government site, for example, back in the US, we have a site like the Veterans Administration, which is struggling to give veterans of wars their services after 18 months, right? And meanwhile, Uber is saying, we'll deliver a car to you in real time at any arbitrary location in 3 minutes. That's a completely different expectation being set on the part of consumers. So when you have a government site like this one, which I'm showing you here is the 50-plus screen application for food services for low-income people in California, that's unacceptable. Now, I work with an NGO called Code for America. I'm on the board of directors, and my wife, Jennifer Polka, who's actually speaking across the hall right now, is the founder and executive director. We work to bring technologists into local governments in the US and around the world. Now, we've been working with the California Department of Social Services to redesign this application. We've got it down to 6 screens on a mobile phone. But Jacob Solomon, who is one of the technologists working on this, said, this is what it really ought to look like if we had all the infrastructure of government in place and it was working the way that consumer expectations and Moore's Law would dictate. He said, I wouldn't have to apply at all. I'd get a text perhaps on my phone that said, oh, I'm so sorry, Jake. We noticed that you were laid off today. Your food benefits will be starting on Thursday. You'll be receiving a check for this much a month, and so on. Today's interfaces are anticipatory. They understand a whole lot about us. Now, government says, oh, whoa, we can't go there. We were worried about privacy. We have all kinds of regulations. We don't have the data together. It's in this silo here and this silo over there. We can't possibly pull all that together. And yet, the consumer is going to be telling us more and more that if you're in government and you're not acting like these consumer experiences, you're useless. You don't really know what you're doing. And that, of course, is the message where people begin to distrust government. They say, oh, they're incompetent, because they have demonstration every day of what technology can do, and they see that government is lagging further and further behind Moore's Law. So I mentioned Code for America. This is the work we're doing. We're bringing technology into government. And this is at the federal level as well. Jen also started something called the United States Digital Service at the White House. We had a terrible disaster with the president's signature initiative, the Affordable Care Act, where the healthcare.gov site wasn't working. We brought in technologists from Silicon Valley to help get through the initial rollout of the site, to rebuild it, but then also to build and to institutionalize digital capability in the federal government. And this has come in the form of something called the United States Digital Service, and also another group, our General Services Administration, called 18F. But we've also brought in people throughout different departments of government. The White House now has its first chief data scientist, Megan Smith out of Google now, the CTO. We also have at the city level people going in, become CIOs, really bringing this new thinking into government. And that's the first step. But government also has to adopt modern technology best practices. And that means user-centered design. That is, you start with understanding what's happening when somebody comes and uses your service. Government services far too often are designed for the benefit of the people administering the services, for the convenience of the people administering the services. We, for example, will often design a website where the citizen or the user is expected to know which department they have to come work with. They don't care about the structure of government. They care about the service they're trying to get. They also have to focus on agile development, that's data-driven. There's a really wonderful story recently from the USDS where a high government official had asked that a particular feature be put in an app that was being developed. And when it wasn't there, she said, "What's going on? We asked for this feature." And they explained, well, we actually put the feature in, but then we took it out to test it with 1,000 people, 1,000 students. It was an education app in a local county, and none of them used it. So we took it out. And this official, to her credit, said, that's amazing. That's not just how we should be developing technology, that's how we should be developing policy. Because in Silicon Valley, we're always trying things, measuring them, seeing what happens, seeing what works, and making them better in a constant process. This is very different than the way government is typically working with technology. Simply, we also need cloud deployment. We need to use open source software. We need open data. And we need to focus on citizen and user engagement. So these are the technology best practices. Jen, when she was at the White House as the U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officer, wrote something called the U.S. Digital Services Playbook. It is a wonderful document to review what these technology best practices are. Also in the UK, they have something called the Government Digital Service. The Government Digital Service Design Principles are one of those documents that I think everyone trying to develop government digital services should study and learn from. It talks about all these modern principles. But there's another thing I'd like to talk a little bit about, and that's a notion that I first articulated 6 or 7 years ago, which is that government at its best acts like a platform. And that means that government does not deliver every service that it intends to go to its citizens. Now, if you want to understand what this means, think about things like highways. The government comes together, builds highways, but it doesn't specify what goes at the ends of the highways. And government has also done this very effectively in other ways. But this is a model that we've seen take hold in technology, this platform idea, in particular with the iPhone. The iPhone was introduced in 2007. Like every other phone, it had 10 or 15 or 20 apps, which did the common phone functions. And then in 2008, Apple did something truly remarkable. They opened this up as a platform for other developers. And we now have well over 1 million apps, billions of downloads of apps, and the smartphone became what we take for granted today, this cornucopia of innovation coming from the market on the platform. Now, this is actually not new to government. If you think about something like GPS, again, something that Dr. Tyson brought up this morning, this was a government program, but there was a critical decision made some years into the development of that program, and that was to open it up for civilian use. Here was a technology originally developed for military purposes, and now the market has added to that, developed navigation on our phones, self-driving cars, facilities like Uber, which would not exist without this government as a platform. But this is government at its best. It's not government as it operates on a day-to-day basis around the world. Far too often, government says we have to do it all, or we can't do it at all. And instead, we have to think about a new way of government to partner with the private sector, doing things that are hard and fundamental and establishing the capabilities on which the private sector can build. So this was a key piece of what was behind President Obama's focus on open data. In his second term management priorities, he talked about the use of open data and government as a platform. And in fact, we've seen that become much more of a focus, particularly in areas like healthcare, where we tried to open up more and more data so that people can build apps and that companies can be built on government data. But we have a long way to go. And I want to ask, what's still missing from my vision of government as a platform? And coming back to healthcare.gov, which so nearly failed and then was rebuilt by a team of talented technologists, there's still a real failure there, even though the site is now working. And that is that they built it, as well as they built it the second time around, still as a one-off, as we call it. And we have other priorities that will use many of the same facilities. What's going on beneath the skin of this thing? This low-level infrastructure. There are things like identity, tracking people's income, tracking who they are, and these interfaces to various other providers, insurance providers, and so on. All of this stuff is the infrastructure of a platform, and it should not be simply the infrastructure of an application. Because, for example, suppose we do immigration reform in the US, many of these same facilities will be required again. And in typical government form, we will actually pay for them again. And we won't have that interoperability that a platform depends on. there's a wonderful video that was put together by the UK Government Digital Service explaining this idea of government as a platform that I'd like to show you for just a moment.
In the past, government has designed public services in a particular way. Each service was built on its own, independently of the others. The service, represented here by this light, did what it was designed to do, but not always very efficiently. Many services duplicated their efforts to do the same thing. The result was a series of disjointed silos. We think there's a simpler, easier way. The same public services, but designed and built differently. It's an idea called government as a platform. It breaks things down into smaller parts, like building blocks. Each block does one job. It's easy to connect blocks together and easy to scale them up when demand increases. If some part of the service breaks, we can fix it or upgrade it easily. Platforms can be opened up too, allowing third-party services to use government data. We've already begun to build platforms. Gov.uk is a platform for publishing, Gov.uk Verify is a platform for identity, and there are many more to come. This is what we mean by government as a platform. Better, smarter public services.
So, building those better, smarter public services and thinking about government as a platform requires changing the process by which government builds and acquires technology. No one's saying it will be easy. In that regard, I want to share a story about a company that many of you know, Amazon, which one of the great e-commerce success stories of the web, but also became one of the great platform stories of the web. Almost all of the modern applications I talked about earlier use Amazon Web Services. How did this happen? I want to tell you a little bit about that. I actually played a small role there. Back in about 2003, I was giving a talk about the history of technology and the transformation that was coming from open source software and into what we now call cloud computing. And one of the lessons I took from the rise of Microsoft that I thought would also apply on the internet was I said, a platform beats an application every time. And Jeff Bezos heard me give that talk and asked me to come up and give it to a small team at Amazon and then later to an all-hands meeting at Amazon in May of 2003. And with his characteristic decisiveness and genius, he went back and said, this is really important. We're going to become a platform company at Amazon. And he wrote a memo which was leaked quite a few years later. I'm not going to read this to you, but the essence of it was, okay, everybody inside Amazon, you're going to stop writing all this code, talking with the next group over. You're going to write it as a set of what we call APIs to services, and then we'll expose those to the outside world. So the key principles are that you create modular building blocks that are callable by API. You use them yourselves in your own app. That is, all those Amazon Web Services that are used by companies like Uber and Airbnb are also used by Amazon. Amazon used them first, but they were designed in such a way that they could then be opened up to the outside world. And so the one thing that Jeff had, which is very, very hard to do in government, the last line of his memo said, you will do this or you will be fired. Now, in the case of government, that's very, very difficult, so it requires a lot more will and a lot more politicking, but it is possible. Now, in the US, a lot of technology by government is acquired through the use of what they call RFPs, where we put out a request for proposal to various vendors. Now, those requests for proposal can, in fact, specify a platform. And we have a success story around that, where we've actually asked in the RFP that the vendor must create our APIs internal to the platform they're building and then open it up to the outside world. This is the model that, for example, we use in travel, where, for example, a lot of the travel booking infrastructure was originally developed by American Airlines as part of Sabre. You can still book through American Airlines, but you can now also book through dozens of online sites because they turned it into a platform for online travel information. Similarly, weather, the National Weather Service in the US provides information directly, but it also provides it so to speak, through retail, through a bunch of resellers. And a company called HipCamp, small entrepreneur, started working with the Department of the Interior in the US to write the RFP for the new recreation.gov site, which Americans use to reserve campgrounds at websites in this platform way. And the RFP actually specifies that there will be APIs so that small companies like HipCamp can provide a better or a different experience for campground reservations. Small thing, but applied throughout government, totally transformative. So, the last thing I want to talk about here about why it's so important for government to take a role in defining the platforms of the 21st century. Abraham Lincoln, our president 150 years ago, said the legitimate object of government is to do for the people that which needs to be done, but which they cannot do by individual effort or at all or as well for themselves. That's a critical idea because government is the one institution that is designed to look out for what is best for everyone. Now, data and these services I'm talking about are the 21st century platform. We need standards for identity, payment, location, credit history, health history, privacy, a whole lot of other areas. And if we leave it up to private companies, these standards are being set by Facebook, by Google, by Apple, by Amazon, by Uber. They are not being set with regard to the concerns that we should have for everyone. So government has to be involved. And I want to close by reminding you of a past industrial standardization, which was the standardization of railroad tracks. What we call standard gauge. It was developed by a guy named George Stephenson in 1822. And it became a standard throughout the British Empire and then throughout the world. And the point is that who sets the gauge, that is the standard, is really critical for who rules the world. And you standardize railroads by actually building the tracks, not just by writing specifications. And that's why I want to end with an invocation from Mike Bracken, who was the head of the UK Government Digital Service. He said, the strategy is delivery. That is, let's not talk about this, let's not just write position papers about it. Government actually has to start doing it. We have to build these advanced services, keeping up with Moore's Law, keeping up with the private sector, but we have to do it in a way in which government becomes a platform for society as a whole. Thank you very much.